So I want to talk about, well, Zambia. Because there's one thing that you could think, Singer talks as if, in a way, he's trying to be very, very practical, and he's one of the most, in some sense, most practical philosophers alive. But you'd think that guy should, more than anybody else, be theorizing about means and relationships. And he doesn't. He's doing more of that in recent years. He's doing more, let's get serious about how political machines actually work, kind of work. But he didn't spend a career doing that. He spent a career saying, look, this is really very simple. You know, we're evil, and we got to do a lot better. But he is very alive. And I mean, so if you'd say, what about failed efforts? What about losing causes? He is very emphatic about saying, I don't believe in fighting for a losing cause. I don't believe in, making a good show on something that's doomed to fail. So he definitely believes in picking efficient means, and now he's starting to actually look into things and say, well, there's a lot of things that sort of look efficient and they're not. So I was crossing the border, it's over a decade now ago, but crossing a border from Zimbabwe into Zambia, and at the border crossing there's this plywood sign, hand-painted. It said, warning, the importation of used clothing into Zambia is strictly prohibited. So I thought, well, I don't know if that has anything to do with me. I don't think so, but it's an odd thing. What would that mean? Why would there be a sign like that? The reason that I was going to Zambia, I thought, had nothing to do with that. I had heard the day before that rhinos had been sighted just across the border, and I thought that would be so cool if I could get to see rhinos. So I phoned up the travel guide, whatever you call him, who had been with the party that had seen rhinos, and I said, can you take me out tomorrow? And he said, no, sorry, I'm booked much farther ahead than that. I can't do it. But I tell you what, I've got a buddy, and he used to be a travel guide himself. Now he works construction, but he's got a Jeep, and he knows the land, he knows the bush. So if you want, I'll give him a call, and he might take you out. And so he called back and said, yeah, my buddy will do it. But he can't get into Zimbabwe. You have to cross the border to meet him on the other side of the border. So I did that, went across. As I was talking to this guy was driving me then to the border, and then I'd have to cross the border on my own. But this guy looked at me and said, I'm curious, are you a reporter? I said, no, although I am writing a book on environmental ethics. And he said, okay. I said, why? Why would you ask if I'm a reporter? And he said, well, you have the eyes of a hunter, but otherwise you look like a tourist, and in my experience that means reporter. Okay, that's pretty cool. So I went across the border, met this guy, had this incredible day, just driving off. I mean, in a way, it's one of the more irresponsible things that I've done, but it was really cool. And so he said, I heard that you are writing a book on environmental ethics. I said, yeah. He said, that's good. I have many stories to tell. And so as we were flying down the highway in this Jeep, right, no hood, I like, wind in the hair, that sort of thing. This guy's telling me about baboons he's known and that kind of thing. It was just awesome, just heading off into who knows where. Okay, but at some point I said, oh, yeah, I was curious, something I don't know, you can tell me. That sign, importation of secondhand clothing, strictly prohibited. What's that all about? And he stopped smiling. The smile just disappeared from his face. He said, I can't tell you that. And he looks at me and he's like, what a weird answer. And then he said, I can show you. Okay, show me. We did see the rhinos, by the way, which is pretty cool. But he drove me to this town, and that was like a movie set. I mean, that was, if you've seen, like, anybody seen like Near Dark or any of those like Quentin Tarantino vampire movies or something like that? I mean, they're so bizarre, right? I mean, they're so unearthly. That was what this was like. So he took me to this diner and brought a couple of people over. There was, I think they were all black, but they were different ages. And men and women, brought them over and said, tell them about the clothing. And so they said, oh, well, we had a drought 8 years ago or so, pretty bad drought, and the aid agencies said, okay, we want to come in and rescue you. But we've got a problem. We just sent grain to India, and rats got into the grain with plague-carrying fleas, and when people found out that the grain that they were lining up to get was carrying plague, they fled back to their villages, and they could have fled back carrying plague. They didn't. We got lucky that time, but anyway, we don't want to send grain again. Money, except that we sent money to Somalia, and what we did was finance a genocide with that, with the automatic weapons that the money ended up purchasing. So, you show up at the border with a suitcase full of money. It crosses the border, and you have no control over what it's going to be spent on, at least in some places. So, didn't want to send money. So, well, what can we do? One thing we could do is send secondhand clothing. I mean, you can't eat old shoes, but at least you don't have to spend your time working to buy clothing, so maybe this in some small way will help people get through this emergency, and it won't do any harm. And then they say, and I say, I'm sorry, I'm a little slow. I don't, like, that was the climax? What does that have to do with the sign? And they looked at me like, okay, I'll spell out everything for them. You may not know, Livingstone, Zambia, until that drought was the textile capital of sub-Saharan Africa. We grew the cotton here, we harvested the cotton, we milled the cotton, we wove it into cloth, and we sold bolts of cloth to this whole region, a whole countries all around. We were the suppliers. And they said, so we could not compete. I mean, our homemade clothing, that was not going to compete with ready-made Levi's. And so the unemployment rate here has been 90% ever since. So, oh, okay, so that was the plague. It was a plague of used clothing. Not plague, I thought maybe, could it be that the used clothing carried the plague? No, it was the plague. So can you generalize from that? I mean, what would that mean? I mean, you think, in retrospect, that's not a really sophisticated kind of mistake. I mean, this is the mistake of not realizing that the people you're trying to help aren't just stomachs. They're people, planners, producers. They've got their own economies. And so if you really want to help them, you have to help them as whole people, not just as mouths to feed. And so, how about that?